We now turn our attention to what is really becoming the big buzzword in 2025, that's trade diplomacy. It started with President Trump announcing a series of trade tariffs, and now there is retaliatory tariffs that have been announced by others. In the midst of this, you have countries like India, which are trying to protect their interests by ensuring that they can try and create some sort of trade negotiations. So viewers, what has happened is that President Trump imposed tariffs on Canada, Mexico and China. He doubled down on them by saying that the time period for any discussions is over. They kick in. Well, the countries are also not taking any of this lying down. Remember, Canada's Liberal Party has actually seen a bump up in its approval ratings because it is seen to be responding proactively to Trump's tariffs. So they've also announced a series of tariffs. China has threatened to announce more tariffs, whereas Mexico has held it so far. Mexican president hasn't announced any tariffs, but that's just one aspect of this story. The larger point is, where does this leave free trade? Where does this leave countries like India, which are trying to find the right way in which they can identify their best interests and create some trade negotiated settlements? So before we go any further, just how far this trade war has already gone, you're going to get a sense of it by listening into what Donald Trump and the Chinese Ministry of spokesperson has to say. Listen in.
But very importantly, tomorrow tariffs 25% on Canada and 25% on Mexico, and that'll start. So they're going to have a tariff. So what they have to do is build their car plants, frankly, and other things in the United States, in which case they have no tariffs.
On the tariffs, is there any room left for Canada and Mexico to make a deal before midnight? And should we expect those Chinese tariffs, the extra 10%, to take
no room left for Mexico or for Canada. No, the tariffs, they're all set. They go into effect tomorrow.
美方如果真想解决芬太尼问题，就应该在平等、尊重、互惠的基础上，同中方磋商，解决各自关切。美方如果别有所图，执意打关税战、贸易战，或者别的什么战，中方将奉陪到底。我们奉劝美方收起霸凌的嘴脸，趁早回到对话合作的正确轨道上来。
All right, Terry Milewski, who's joining me live from Canada. Ambassador Gupta, of course, was with the IDSA, and David K. Johnston, senior journalist and author. Terry, let me start with you. Canada, Mexico and China are the top 3 trade partners of the U.S. In fact, with Canada and Mexico, Trump did stitch together a free trade agreement last time around. But how do you see this rhetoric that's going on this time around, and how that trade war is only escalating with Canada responding?
Well, I think Canada has learned from what happened last time that Mr. Trump was president. At that time, you will recall that Canada imposed retaliatory tariffs, which were very carefully targeted. Targeted, that is, on areas of the United States, businesses in the United States, which were A, vulnerable, B, in a position to put pressure on President Trump. So, for example, Mitch McConnell was the Republican leader in the Senate, and guess what? He's from Kentucky, and Kentucky bourbon, yes, that was on the Canadian tariff list. That's just an example. So I think that this time Canada is making a serious effort to be just as strategic, even more strategic, carefully applying the pressure where they hope that it will hurt the most in order to impose a cost upon the American administration. Canada also is well aware that this time around, the whole world is ready for it. It's been advertised. We find ourselves now in the same camp as rather a powerful group of countries, including China, of course, that are resentful and angry about the imposition of these tariffs by the United States and determined to make it every bit as costly as they can for the Americans. Now, already we have seen that a lot of Americans have lost money. How so? Because they only just came on today. Well, that's because the stock market slid, what, 2% yesterday? And it's probably going to go down more. This is going to hurt everyone. Indeed. And it remains to be seen. The only question, the open question, is that there will be pain aplenty, not just in the targeted countries, But in the US, how long it will take to have some effect is that question we can't answer yet. We're going to have to see how resilient Trump is in insisting that his brand of know-nothing 19th century economics will survive and prove itself as successful. I doubt that very
Indeed.
much.
Absolutely. Ambassador Gupta, in the midst of all this matters to us because how does this impact our trade interests? We're trying to stitch FTAs, whether with the EU, with the UK. There's the Belgian delegation here. We're also, there is a trade delegation that is in the US to try and see what we can do to insulate our interests. How do you see our next steps in the midst of a very charged protectionist global trade environment?
Well, firstly, we've shown a lot of understanding to the position that Trump has taken. He's, after all, reanalyzing the trade relations from the point of view of interest to America. And I think nobody can fault anybody for that. You're supposed to protect your national interest. And now, having said that, India is a very small exporter. Our exports are about $50 billion. And when you compare it with all the three countries that were listed, Mexico, China, and Canada, they all export in upwards of $400 billion. So our exports are really just about 10-12% of what these countries are exporting. So we are a very small player in this. Plus, we have been shown a very conciliatory approach, and we're trying to negotiate a trade deal. Our Commerce Minister is already in the US.
Yes.
We're looking at expanding the trade with America, making it to about $500 billion. We've also shown willingness when Prime Minister Modi was there that we will buy energy sources from US. And there are indications, I'm sure, which has not been spelled out, but India is going to buy or increase its purchase of military hardware from America. So I think all said and done, plus, mind you, America and Trump do recognize India as a very important strategic ally. Indeed. So I think India would be spared the rod, it seems to me.
Mr. Johnston, then, which brings me to ask you this question. Some of the other panelists mentioned that this is going to have an impact on the American consumer, on the American economy. How do you think President Trump is going to respond to that or cushion his electorate?
Well, he's not. Donald Trump actually follows 17th century economics. He's a mercantilist, the same economics that led the British to put India under London's boot for 3 centuries. And he believes that if you have a dollar, that means he doesn't have that dollar, and that the only way to get it is to take it from you. And tariffs are an effective strategy for a developing country. But those tariffs are going to be paid by American consumers who are going to see their prices rise, and it's going to make Americans worse off. Donald has this bizarre notion that China and Canada and Mexico are going to pay these tariffs, and they are not. And also, remember that Donald denounced our trade agreements, America's trade agreements with Canada and Mexico. He said, who would do this? Well, he did. This is his own agreement. And it goes to the heart of the fact that Donald is appallingly ignorant. He really doesn't know anything.
Okay. Sir, at the cost of repeating, experts can get away by expletives to heads of state. Journalists have to refrain. So, I'm not going to allow, those comments simply because, they're extreme in nature. But the fact is, this trade war has only started. And I feel it is going to impact all countries, those who may or may not be part of it.